Welcome to South Asia Monitor's SAM Conversation. I am Tarun Basu. In this program, we are going to discuss the recent youth uprisings in South Asia, which, as we all know, is home to a quarter of the global population, and which has not just taken the countries themselves by surprise, but also the region and the world. And it has been extensively reported and analyzed around the world. Youth-led revolts have led to the fall of three governments in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. While in the most recent case in India, over a month-long sustained student-led protests have caused the resignation of a cabinet minister and shaken up the Modi government like never before. The pent-up anger of the youth has taken the older generation by surprise in most of these countries, including its political parties, where youth representation in politics has not really kept up with the youth demographics. Many questions have been raised in each of these countries about the provenance of these protests, their financing, their alleged infiltration by outsiders, and most important, the sustainability of such spontaneous yet largely organic movements. To answer some of these questions and discuss the South Asian youth unrest, we have with us an eminent panel of experts from the region. Sugiswara Senadhira, journalist, diplomat, civil servant, columnist, strategic analyst from Colombo, who, as you can see, has worn a wide range of professional hats in his decades-long professional career. We have Dr. Ghulam Rasool, economist, professor, scholar, and policy commentator from Dhaka. And lastly, T. Uday Bhaskar, president of the Society for Policy Studies that runs South Asia Monitor, an Indian Navy veteran, and a preeminent strategic and contemporary affairs analyst and commentator. Mr. Senadhira, we'll start with you because Sri Lanka was the first country in the region to witness these youth-led revolts, which were called Argalaya, which I think means the struggle. A series of mass protests that began in March 2022 against severe economic mismanagement that led to crippling inflation, daily blackouts, and shortages of fuel, gas, and essential goods. Crowds stormed the presidential residence on July 9. That's again almost 4 years ago, forcing President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to flee the country. Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned in May, followed by Gotabaya's resignation on July 14. The movement successfully ousted the powerful Rajapaksa family from power. Mr. Senadhira, 3 years later, or 4 years later, where does the country stand? And what is the status of the protesters, as not much has been heard about them? Have they dispersed? Or is there some kind of a pressure group that is working to see the causes that led to their action get resolved?
Thank you, Mr. Basu. Thank you, Mr. Basu. Hello, Professor Ghulam Rasool and Commodore Bhaskar. First of all, I would like to say that the Aragaleo started, the youth unrest in South Asia was a continuous thing. The political landscape of South Asia, which was dominated by traditional political parties for the more than 8 decades after independence of Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, and the other countries in South Asia, they're undergoing a profound transformation now. The region's youth, from vibrant professionals to educated, but mostly not only unemployed, but also underemployed youth, have emerged as the most potent force challenging the entrenched political establishments. We had, as you know, since 48, we had a two-party system, Sri Lanka Freedom Party and United National Party ruled in turn for the first 4 decades of the post-independence period. So youth struggle was something continued even from it inherited from the colonial era. So in the 30s, Sri Lanka's elite, the youth of elite families went to USA and UK, London School of Economics, Cambridge, Oxford, and so they, as of similar to Indian or Bangladesh, I mean Indian or Pakistani or the South Asian nations, elite youth, they turned to be the Marxist socialist, and they took the anti-colonial crusade throughout. You know, Dr. Nempera, the Philip Gunadhan, Peter Kenneman, and all those leftist leaders not only started the anti-colonial the movement in Sri Lanka, they also helped the downtrodden people of Sri Lanka by establishing cooperative movements, anti-malaria, health campaigns, then Surya Mal movement, similar to the poppy flower movement of the British Allied forces. So this sort of things started way back in 1930s. The trend continued, but with the establishment of the traditional after independence, the two traditional parties, it changed. But youth insurrections of the 1971, first by the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, which is ruling Sri Lanka now under with the alliance of the National People's Power, and the Tamil militant youths of Liberation Tigers or Tamil Elam, they entrenched the political leadership in the among the common people. But still, the people of Sri Lanka were not ready for revolutionary armed bloodshedding revolutionary transformation in the society. Hence, they did not succeed at that juncture. In Tarun, your question about the Aragale, which started when, because of the growing middle class professionals, the expansion of the middle class in Sri Lanka, it came to almost 40% of the entire population, the middle class, which was, at the time of independence, it was merely about 12%. And with that, the middle class professionals, youths too, were disentrenched with the continuous dominance of the two parties and especially during Mahinda Rajapaksa's tenure, followed by other two leaders, there were corruption at a very high level. So this began as anti-corruption with the economic collapse in 1922. What happened was the professional youths came to street.
Sorry to interrupt you. Much of the history is known. What we would like to know, or what our audience would like to know, that 4 years later, where does this movement stand? We haven't heard much about it. Where are the student leaders? And have they formed a political party? Have they formed some kind of an organization? Have there some kind of a pressure group that they have formed? Who keeps track of the promises that the government made at that time, and whether the reasons for which they went to and launched this protest, have those reasons been, have the reasons the government has attended to them, and have they been the problems been answered?
what happened was the movement was led by the youths of socialist movements, who broke away from the radical Janata Vimukti Peramuna, today's ruling party. They found that after JVP entered the democratic mainstream, they formed the forward bloc, the Peratugami Paksha.
Okay.
So that group started with establishing their the total control over the universities. University students' unions, all of them except for Jaffna and Batticlore and Trinco, all other 12 universities, the student movements are controlled by the Peratugamis, the forward bloc. And forward bloc paved way for the Aragalia. I mean, they were the leading figures of the Aragalia. But after the end of Aragalaya, after Gotabaya fled the country and the change of government, the JVP took over the banner, and with that they came into power. With that, the government, people's, total
So some
dissatisfaction.
of those student leaders who led the movement, they are in power now.
And no, not any of them, but they were
Where
in
are
a,
they? Where are they?
they are still continuing their struggle, but they are in a very bad wicket because now their slogans are taken over by the government party, the
Oh, I see. Okay.
former radical militant, armed militants of JVP. Now they have taken all those slogans.
The government kind of hijacked their slogans, you are
That's
saying.
right. That's
Okay.
quite right.
All right. Okay. So the movement which created so much stir and led to the fall of the government, the core movement has more or less been scuttled or dispersed. Is that right?
Well, it
Or is there any
is.
some pressure group left from them who kind of monitors what the government is doing?
Um, yes, they do monitor, especially I mean, the forward block and other several groups of Aragale. One Aragale party is the radical militant group now turned to democratic mainstream. And forward block, you see, they could not win any seats in parliament. But still, even today, they are controlling the students' movement, not only in the universities, but also in certain establishments like uh, Colombo Port and
Okay.
the trade unions of various establishments. So they are forced to reckon with.
Okay, okay. We'll come back to you. And also, I would like you to comment later after Commodore Bhaskar on how the Indian protest movement played in Sri Lanka and what influence did it have. But we'll come back to you later. Now, I invite Dr. Ghulam Rasool. Dr. Rasool, August 5, as you have written today in a commentary, is a very significant date in Bangladesh's recent political history. Exactly 2 years ago, on this day in 2024, the Awami League's government's 16-year rule came to an end amid a nationwide mass uprising that emerged from the anti-discrimination student movement. The movement, which began with demands for quota reform in public sector recruitment, gradually evolved into a nationwide uprising as people from all walks of life joined the students. Professionals, workers, teachers, parents, relatives of those killed during the protests, and countless ordinary citizens took to the streets in support of the movement. So 2 years later, where are the students and what is left of this historic movement, Dr. Rasool? Over to you.
Very much, Torunji. You have rightly mentioned that today Bangladesh is celebrating a second anniversary of, here is called July Revolution, on when the Awami League government and toppled after 16 years of ruling. So this is a significant historical significant. So this is particularly for Bangladesh has some political. Of course, this movement, as you mentioned, it started with economic, but it immediately moved to the political and then also institutional. So last 2 years, there are a lot of demand, and particularly the student leader who were earlier leading this movement started, basically from the Dhaka University, our center. So their demand when gradually become it's a people's demand. So their demand was basically a change in political system. It was demand. Initial demand was quota removal, then demand of the government fall, and then actually after this, when government fall, then demand move further. We need a political change in political system, because the current political system have been Bangladesh we are seeing. So there was a many some sort of issue and grievances coming. Particularly, our political system gives a lot of authority and power to the prime minister. All authority power was concentrated in the hand of the prime minister. So there was the issue: how can we distribute the power to different sectors, so that, or different constitutional bodies, so that the authoritarian prime minister cannot be authoritarian. So demand was coming, major demand was coming, the reform. One reform is the constitutional reform, to distribution the power of the prime minister and other institutions equally, so that it is. And then demand was also to judiciary, change the judiciary really independent. Demand was to making institution more accountable, transparent, all that.
How much of these demands have been met?
Okay. So now these student leaders, they formed after that they formed a political
party, yeah.
party called National Citizenship Party, NCP. So the NCP is now participated in election in last February. We had a national election. In this election, a good number of the student leaders came in a parliament. So they are now in opposition. So they are now in the opposition in parliament. So now Bangladesh, if we look at the outcome of the last movement, we can see there is a change in political government. Now new government, there is an election, elected relatively free and fair election was done. And then now in the elected government running the country. So this is one major shift here. And regarding the outcome change, what the demand was coming from the street, that we need to change the political system, more accountable, more transparent, that. So that is the process is started. But I think they're changing the democratic institution and judiciary. It said takes some time. So constitutional reform process also is going on now. So this that student leaders are in part of this process now.
Okay, Dr. Ghulam Rasool, thank you for your submissions on Bangladesh. But since we have nobody from Nepal in this program, I would like you to quickly also, tell us a bit about the Nepal, because that was after Bangladesh. This happened last year in Kathmandu and elsewhere. The turmoil began on September 8th. So, coincidentally, all these events, whether in Bangladesh, whether in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, India, all happened during this July, August, September months, And when police in Kathmandu opened fire on anti-corruption protesters as they tried to breach parliament walls, those youth were spurred by rising costs of living, inflation, corruption and nepotism, and rising inequality between the elite and ordinary folks. Mobs torched buildings, looted banks and shops, and attacked politicians in their homes. The violence killed more than 70 people and wounded thousands more. And in less than 48 hours, protesters forced the overthrow of the government. Nepal's government was the third in South Asia to be overthrown by protesters. And it underscored the profound generational change shaking the world's most populous region and testing government's ability to meet their citizens' expectations. Professor Rasool, just a few words on Nepal, if you can just take 2 minutes on Nepal, and then we'll come back to you later.
Okay.
Actually, Nepal, to me, it is a very unprecedented. But like Bangladesh, we are students are always, historically, they are very active. Nepal was unprecedented, and Nepali people are so peaceful. When I was looking at the Nepal protest, I was showing burning. It is amazed me because I lived more than 10 years in Nepal, and I see that Nepali people are so soft, so polite. They really very quite a different comparison to our, I would say, Bangladesh, India, all that. So when I saw that wow, this causes, what are the grievances? So I can just immediately recognize that when the new government came in the Maoist government, communist government, actually I was in Kathmandu in 2006, that movement also, I saw that huge movement. And I saw that when with strong majority, the Maoist government, communist government come here, huge expectation of the people for that. There was many expectation, good governance and economic growth, development, all that. But again and again, there was a frustration coming from the people as a whole and the young people particularly. So there was the government was totally, I would say, could not deliver meet the expectation of the people, quite ineffective and frequent change of the government. In I think last 10 years they have 13, 14 government has changed. So it was basically this coalition, that coalition.
Youthful prime minister has a Gen Z prime minister has taken office, but I think once again, the frustration and resentment of old issues have come to the surface, and I read about a lot of protests happening still in Kathmandu. So obviously, the problems that caused this revolt have not been resolved by a new prime minister who's supposed to know the feelings and aspirations of the youth much more than previous prime ministers.
I think I have been following this, but I think what I have been following and that the new prime minister actually he has taken very strongly against corruption to enhance the accountability, good governance, and some of the issue what we have seen some in Tarai, some Hindu Muslim issue, all these issues coming. I think these are not a very structural or bigger issue. These are coming very. I see these are basically local issue coming from some Sansuri district of Tarai of local. So, but when I saw that this government, looking the performance of the only few months. So I think this government is, in terms of their commitment, I think this government is trying to do. Because
Okay.
Nepal, one of the major issue was the ineffectiveness of the government and corruption. I think in both the side, this government I see is really doing effective job. But some of the recent issue, what we are seeing now, to me, these are basically very local issue. These are not the structural
All right.
issue of the thing. So
Good to get this clarification. Well, now we turn to India, the most recent of these events, which are too recent to bear repetition and has been followed and reported globally. Commodore Uday Bhaskar himself was there at the protest site more than one day. All I was say was that in a turn of events that possibly no one in India expected, right up to the Prime Minister, the 36-day protest led to two senior cabinet ministers of the Modi government coming to negotiate with the students. The education minister was forced to resign, and the government had to give written assurances to the students besides committing to withdraw all legal and police cases against them. So what are the lessons to be drawn from this, Uday?
The lessons that can be drawn, Tarun, as you rightly pointed out, this has been a very, very significant punctuation in Indian politics, particularly in the last 12 years since Prime Minister Modi has assumed office, because this is his third term. And there has been a sense of an aura about the Modi government that they were in a very, very powerful position electorally, and that the government seemed to be quote unquote invincible in terms both of its electoral footprint and the way in which the government was being run. Clearly, there were a number of inadequacies in the education sector which are structural. I think we must acknowledge that the deficiencies, inadequacies in the Indian education system have been festering for decades. I mean, it goes back, frankly, I think, to the time Prime Minister Narasimha Rao was in office, and he himself was the minister for HRD. And he realized the scale of the problem, but the state was not able to prioritize funding and finding the right kind of HR. And that was a complex problem because in India, education is what is called as a concurrent subject. Responsibility devolves both on the center and the state governments. And we are also aware that large states like Uttar Pradesh in India, even after the bifurcation, have populations that are larger than major European countries like France and Germany and so on. So in that sense, the first observation is that the problem in education is structural. But July 20th, I think the way in which the protesters, they called themselves the CJP, the Cockroach Janata Party, were able to garner support, not just from Gen Z as it is called, but from a senior demography, some millennials, some who were in their 40s and 50s, all who were drawn to Jantar Mantar, which is this very, very famous site in Delhi for protests. And the trigger really was the way in which the Chief Justice of India had referred or used the term cockroaches, and that was picked up, and that again is very well known. But the lessons learned.
If you don't mind, as a baby boomer who went to the protests, what did you expect and what really surprised you when you went there?
What surprised me, Tarun, was the energy. The day I went, it was 3 days before 20th. We were there on 16th, 17th of July. And I met a large cross-section of students, their well-wishers, people in their 30s and 40s. I met some post-doc students who had come from different parts of India. There were a couple of youngsters who came all the way from Bombay just to be part of the protest. Because in many ways, the exam leak, that was the catalyst. The fact that the exam paper for the NEET, India has this one exam for students who are aspiring for various professional courses. And that leak had enormous repercussions for them. So that was the trigger. But what I saw was energy, and it was a very Gandhian protest. It is true that there were some elements who were trying to raise trouble.
That way, Uday, I think this Indian protest at Jantar Mantar was different from the ones in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal, which were very violent and led to a lot of loss of lives. But in the New Delhi protest and also the ones that happened in other cities, they were largely peaceful and, as you said, very Gandhian. And if at all there is any violence, was on the part of the police and security forces. I don't think the students, by and large, engaged in any violence. Now, a question that, I have been asked and a lot of people are asking, and especially people from our generation who are a little skeptical, if not cynical, is this really spontaneous? Wasn't it funded by somebody? And how can the students mobilize so many people on their own? I'm told that in the initial days, when they called when they gave a call for the Parliament March, the Intelligence Bureau reported that they were expecting about 5,000 people maximum, but 50,000 turned up. That shows how hopelessly wrong they were. So what was it that the generation did, this Gen Z did, or the way they interacted and the way they mobilized, that really took everybody by surprise?
No, you're right. And many questions have been asked.
Instrumentalities that they used.
I'm saying the kind of questions that you have raised have been asked by a number of people. There are various conspiracy theories. People are asking the same question. How was Dipke, the leader, allowed to come from Boston? Why did the government give permission for Jantar Mantar? So one conspiracy theory is that the government enabled it to sort out some domestic politics. But I don't buy that. When I recall my visit, how did they organize themselves? How did the food arrive? Things of that sort. I think there really were a large number of well-wishers who were mobilized. Many of them chose to be anonymous. and didn't want to be identified. But what stands out to me, Tarun, is the fearlessness of this entire generation of student protesters. The young men and the women, I would salute the women because they were there from all parts of India, from all demographies. There were some young girls whom I spoke to from UP and Bihar who had come there without the permission of their parents, and their parents were the equivalent of daily wagers and those who were selling vegetables and that kind of cross section. So I would say the Indian protest is actually sui generis. It is very distinctive. It had the potential to become pan-India. That is when I think the Prime Minister stepped in, and Pradhan, the Minister for Education, his resignation, I think, was in a way compelled. So there's much to discuss about the Indian protest and what impact it will have on Indian politics and the education system, hopefully. But I think for now, we will defer to our colleagues from Sri Lanka and Bangladesh.
Yes, Mr. Senadhira. So, how much did these Indian protests play in Sri Lanka? Were they closely followed by the young people, and were comparisons drawn between the Argalaya protest and the Delhi protest? And what are the kind of conclusions that people have drawn there?
Yes, whatever happens in India is extremely crucial for Sri Lankans. They keep India watch throughout, especially the younger lot. They always look at India. But what you mentioned about two things in the discussion about violence and death toll in Bangladesh and Nepal, but even in Sri Lanka, though protesters surrounded the president's house, uh, then President Gotabaya Rajapaksa did not order the security forces to shoot at the protesters. Simply, he decided to leave the premises and go to Trincomalee. Is it with that many? If he had given any orders, his personal security guards would have, taken arms against the protester. There could have been a bloodbath, but that did not happen. So, fortunately, there are no large-scale bloodshed in Sri Lankan protest. Uh, the other one is that Sri Lankan protest is different from India's one because Sri Lanka, it was the middle class youths who took the leadership of the Aragalaya and the university students. Hardly any rural youths were there at the forefront of the Aragalaya. They were completely Colombo-based professionals, youths, even doctors, engineers, architects. They all took, and there were hardly any politicians in the forefront of the Aragalaya. In fact, both Anur Kumar Disanayak and then opposition leader, still the opposition leader, Premadasa, Sajith Premadasa, they tried to enter the Aragalaya premises to express their support to them, but they were chased away. Both Anur Kumar and Premadasa had to run into their cars because the Aragalaya supporters were chasing them. And so that's one of the differences. There was no politics in this one, even in the Indian ones. I don't think it's very much similar to that. So Sri Lanka watch it very, very carefully, especially the forward bloc, which I said the force to reckon with. You see, they are the leading opponents now, though they are not heard much in the international arena because they don't hold office. But more than the opposition, the main opposition parties like the United National Party, Sri Lanka Freedom Party, and the newly merged SJB of Premadasa, all these parties are playing the opposition role within the parliament and within the democratic setup. Whereas the former Aragalaya leaders of the forward bloc, they started mobilizing people now, especially in the universities and the institutions, and also trade union movement. They have entrenched the trade union movement also. They keep a close watch on the Indian one and learn lessons from there, and they try to. So they, currently, their main aim is to correct the path of the government. The government has given a lot of promises as during an election you give all sort of promises and you can hardly keep them when the inflation is galloping and the economic growth is deteriorating, declining, and with these problems and unemployment, more than unemployment is underemployment. With these issues, there's a resentment among the youth now. So the forward bloc and other Aragale leaders are trying to capitalize on that, and for them, this very good lesson from India, the cockroach party.
Okay, great. Professor Rasool, I'll now ask you the same question I asked Mr. Senadhira. How much did this Indian student protest play in Bangladesh? And what lessons can be drawn and where comparisons drawn between what happened in August 2024 and July, August 2026 in India?
Thank you very much again. So I think now the student movement. It is now it is not only an economic and political issue. It is a geopolitical issue also, because now there is a cross-country sharing and learning is very common, very strong even, I would say. Even when Bangladesh 2024 movement was there, I saw there was a strong support from India on there. Even Kolkata, there was a street protest in support of the Bangladesh protester. So here in now, when the Janata Mantra, the movement was going on, what I saw observed in social media and the people, they are very closely following and sharing and feeling some sort of sympathy. This sympathy was there. They are strongly feeling. But important lesson, I think, what can be drawn from India, from other countries, particularly what I was observing and a little bit very inspired what our Commodore Uday Bhaskarji told, that Indian movement is a characteristics was quite different from other three movements. If you see that both Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, these are quite violent at a certain stage.
Yeah.
In Bangladesh, one initially was very non-violent, but at the end it was very violent. When the state machinery started, then it became very violent. Lot of people died, lot of things. Even Nepal is such a peaceful and so people, there are so much violent activity.
Professor Rasool, the writer Taslima Nasreen, who's now in Calcutta, and you must have read about her speeches, she has alleged that the student movement in Bangladesh, although it was started by students, was hijacked by the Islamists. And that's why it led to so much violence. And if the Islamists had not hijacked, possibly that much violence had not happened. And Islamists, she obviously meant the Jamaat Islam. Is there any truth in that?
Yeah, there are different aspects of looking at that. But when the student movement started, initially they are non-political, non-partisan. They are really student, and demand was there. But when the movement spread, then many political parties also come, including the Jamaat Islam or other political parties, because Jamaat Islam and particularly there was a big grievances against the Awami League government, like that their elections are not free, fair, all that. So there was general grievance that there is no way to change the government through democratic way. This was a major political grievance in entire country was there, because three election was very contentious, and there was, so when it became from a student movement to the mass movement, then many parties came, including Jamaat Islam, and these parties has a very strong.
Did they not only rode that student bandwagon, but did they hijack the movement completely?
That I am not sure whether we can say they hijacked it, but of course they played an important role there because many of the student leader, when they have because the Islamic parties, they have a strong cadre-based cadre, ideological strong cadre. So when they participated, so movement become very a bit violent. So I think I do not fully buy the Taslima Nasrin comment, but of course there was many people participated, including Islamic parties, and Islamic parties they have a trend of a strong cadre, so that make the probably the movement very a bit violent.
All right. Uday, can I bring you in to round up this discussion? Also, I would like you to, because when you're talking of South Asia, we cannot but not talk of Pakistan. And there has been speculation whether Pakistan too such a movement can happen or not happen. And there's an interesting article written by our friend and leading strategic affairs commentator Raja Mohan, who says, and I quote, that although there's a lot of frustration among Pakistan youth, but the Pakistani army's instrumentalization of religion nationalism and state control over society prevents this frustration from coalescing into a nationwide democratic movement like the ones that happened in the rest of South Asia. Uday, would you like to comment on this and round up these discussions?
Yeah, I think specific to Pakistan, Tarun, I would say that's a fair comment, what Raja Mohan has said. And perhaps the Pakistani deep state has learned from the Imran Khan experience. Because if you recall, youth had been mobilized by the Imran Khan PTI. And subsequently, it took the army about a year plus to be able to get on top of this situation as to how to control social media and thereby prevent the youth from mobilizing in the way that they were capable of. But one interesting aspect which plays into Indian domestic politics also is that this particular movement, one of the elements is the use of social media, particularly Instagram, and the irreverence with which they approached those in authority. The way in which they, for instance, ridiculed Prime Minister Modi is something that is unprecedented. It is
unprecedented completely.
But I'm saying it's unfortunate that some of them, of course, turned and used vulgar language. But by and large, I think the sentiment that they exuded was both innocence and insouciance. A kind of irreverence that was spontaneous. And that ricocheted into Pakistan. Because I followed that very closely. And many Pakistani young influencers were actually empathizing and saying that but for the border, we would have been at Jantar Mantar. So what that does in terms of domestic politics is that in a way it undermines Pakistan as the adversary, which had been one of the planks for the BJP. But that's a far more complex subject. We'll get there at some point, hopefully. But the relevance for South Asia, which I think both Professor Rasool and Mr. Sanadira had touched upon, is that for South Asia, all these movements, both in individual countries such as Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, and what has happened in India, there are many lessons both for those who are governing these countries and those in civil society who can possibly make a contribution. I deliberately use the word govern because this is one of the things that struck me when I went to Jantar Mantar Tarun. Many of these youngsters, students, protesters are very well read. They are able to quote Ambedkar, the Constitution. And one question they asked me, I'm 75 plus, we are in that generation. They said, why are we constantly told that we are being ruled? Modi does not rule India. He governs India. And I thought that was a very important observation in terms of the accuracy. Absolutely. So I think for South Asia, some of the numbers are staggering. South Asia's total population is in excess of 2 billion. It is estimated that more than 30% of them could be considered Gen Z or young generation. That is more than 650 to 680 million. The people who are governing have to deal with this ferment. And one particular, I think, lesson that is learned from all these countries is that using force can give you short-term stability. But the major problem has to be addressed, education and the fact that most of it is being privatized, at least in India, and employment, Tarun. That is a
Yeah,
huge
that is a
number.
major point.
Every month, South Asia has 1 million people who are entering the workforce, the labor market, and there are no jobs. So government after government is, I think today we had an article by 3 very eminent Indians about
Yeah.
over-promising and not delivering. That could be
Delivering, I
said of all of South Asia. There is a large economic underpinning related to inflation. Where there is employment, they are underpaid. So I think these are all structural issues that have to be addressed. But I'd like to thank our guests, both Mr. Sanadhira from Sri Lanka, Professor Ghulam Rasool, who is an active contributor, so is Sanadhira. And I think I'm glad that South Asia Monitor as a platform is able to enable these kind of exchanges. We haven't really got to any conclusion about these protests. I hope we can revisit it again. But on that note, let me thank Mr. Sanadhira from Sri Lanka, Professor Ghulam Rasool from Bangladesh. And Tarun, thank you for putting this together and allowing us to have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.